Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we are back in War Thunder and having a look at Gentlespie's 1.101 dev datamine. The reason why we're doing this is because even in the official major updates, like a listing which you can find here, which I'll leave a link to in the description, normally there's a few things that are kind of missed out or they're differently worded, and it's always good to look over the datamine. So as always, thank you to Father Gentlespie for putting this together. It's always nice of him to do this, and it should be seen as a credit to the community. So, overall, my thoughts on the dev server is that there wasn't a ton of vehicles on there, but there was a lot of interesting vehicles. The main thing, though, was there was a ton of new mechanics, some of them working very well, some of them working not so well, and hopefully by the time, the update comes out, or we have a second dev server, they'll be able to. So stuff like the semi-active, missiles, they were a little bit off and on. Some of them worked sometimes, some of them didn't. Then you had stuff such as the LWR stuff, or LWS, I can't remember what it was called, but those worked pretty well. And then, I think it's LWR. And then, of course, you had the new shell changes. The volumetric shell stuff, which actually worked pretty well. So it's a little bit hit and miss, but one thing to understand is this update seems to be very much around adding new mechanics to the game, which is good, because that fundamentally changes how the game works, and this means that overall it's going to affect more people's gameplay experience instead of just a few new vehicles. So let's have a look at the tank changes. The first one is changes to the residual penetration of shattering for long rod APF SDS and regular APF SDS. So they're changing how the post-pen effect is going to work for APF SDS. We're going to have to see how this affects the vehicles. They've also lowered bullet supersonic flyby sound radius from 80 to 18 meters. This is actually a really nice change. It pretty much means that, you're not going to be hearing shoop, 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 shoop everywhere, which was the problem before. What was generally happening is, overall, the new artillery sounds that were brought in, the new machine gun sounds, the new general shell sounds were a little bit overbearing, and it's nice to see that that has been reduced. Now we have a ton of new tank sounds, especially internal tank sounds when you're in the gunner sight, which are incredibly loud. So I think some people are going to have to change their sound options for that. They also added the new armor class, Relict. We saw this on the dev server. If you want to see its statistics, you can have a look at the T-72B3 video that I did. The Relict is present on the T-72B3, but it is only present when you get the 2016 modification of it, which is a rank 4 modification, and that adds Relict to the back of the side and back of the turrets, also the front side of the tracks as well. Then you also have the T-80B's composite. It is getting reduced from 0.55 to 0.2. That's quite a large change, and I'm sure that's actually going to make quite a large difference to the survivability of the vehicle. They've added a new explosive type, the TP-88, which is 1.3 times equivalent to TNT PBXN, which is 1.28 equivalent to TNT. My guess is this is probably going to be something to do with the naval mines, but obviously don't hold me to that. It might be new bombs which are added to the game. Then we have RDX TNT being changed from 1.28 to 1.6. They've also added a few more angles to the slope effect for long rod APF SDS, so 40, 60, 50, and 90. This should mean that the APF SDSs are more, I suppose, more accurate, more realistic. Might be a little bit of a stretch, but it will now be easier to pinpoint why stuff bounces compared to why it doesn't before, why it ricochets, I should say. They've changed an IP-157's radar tracking azimuth from minus 90 to minus 15, so that's a big nerf to that. big old loss in overall coverage there, which kind of sucks. And the change type 90 suspension offsets, yeah, so it isn't rolling around like a crazy machine. And then they've added LWR. So this is what I was talking about, the laser warning receiver, which is a new mechanic which has been added to a bunch of stuff. The Type 87, now it can be hull broken on turret damage. There is actually a bunch of changes to hull break as well. We're going to have to see how they affect the game. Overall, there's just so many changes going on with it, and new parameters which are being added to it. I'm guessing it's because of the shell changes, you know, making them volumetric, so we'll have to see, as I said, how that affects. It might be a rough few weeks. The first few weeks this update comes out with a lot of weird stuff going on, but hopefully that doesn't happen. The Ariete PSO and also the Centauro MGS, they've received LWRs as well. The M60A3 SLEP, the NVDs for the Commander have been changed to thermals. So now the M60A3 SLEP has access to Commander thermals. Now, it still has some inherent issues with it, but that is a nice little addition to it. That is now becoming very much more like the M48 Super, with a slightly worse characteristics in certain ways, but yeah, it's just, Commander's thermals are always nice. The T-72B3 Race weapon model fix for the 125. I've heard issues with this biathlon event. I haven't looked into it too much, myself. I've obviously been busy doing dev server stuff, so I'll get to it on, Tuesday and see what it's about. The BMP3 changed Commander thermal to infrared. That's kind of annoying for the BMP3 because it does have really good thermals, and not being able to see everything with those thermals and scout with them is kind of annoying. So yeah, you're just going to have to be a little bit sharp with your eyes. The ship changes, so they've changed ship superstructure fire parameters and added a bunch of parameters for various ship classes. Okay, so we'll have to see how that affects the destruction of these ships. Made ship fire and smoke visible only from 5 kilometers away instead of 15. So that's probably because when you saw them from like 10 to 15 kilometers, the smoke and the fire looked very odd. It looked like the whole ship was a bonfire instead of just a specific part of it. So maybe this is, trying to address that. They've changed naval mine detection distance from 100 meters to 160 meters. This is obviously a very good change. I will say, when it comes to the naval mines, I really don't like the fact that they have such a low timer on them. We were testing them with dropped from planes, but we were also testing them dropped from ships. And the naval mines themselves, it seemed like they only had like 40 seconds to a minute of actually being there. And I think that, especially for destroyers, that is way too low for a timer for these mines. I'm sure that it'll be changed, but it's just, something which crossed the mind. Changed almost all ship DMs. Yeah, we'll have to see how this patch affects ships. It's going to be pretty big when it overall comes to it. So the air changes, so they've added 2 new radar codes, radar error speed and radar error gain. This is probably to do with the new missiles they've added, and also a bunch of plane DMs. The only ones that I didn't cover on the dev server, obviously the Jaguars were in the files. They weren't actually, they weren't actually on the dev server. And then you have this Focke-Wulf 190A5 cannons tutorial, and then you have the Spitfire 9 tutorial. Something tells me they are revamping beginner content, and if that is the case, that's awesome, because, it's always nice to have more tutorials, always nice to have more information in the game, so people can learn about the game as quick as possible. They also changed a bunch of the F-104's flaps, and also the YP38 FM was added. That was actually in the dev server. If you didn't know, the YP38 is going to replace the XP38G technically, so you have a limited time to get the XP38G before it disappears. If you already own it in War Thunder, you will keep it. You know, it's not getting taken away from you, but it will be removed from sale, basically. Then there was some heli changes, so some machines got LWRs, so very similar to the Ariete PSO, where if you are lasered, then it will let you know. So the H-64D, the H-64A, the AH Mark 1, and also the AH-1Z Viper all got this feature. Then the LWRs were also given to the Mi-28N, the K-52 and the K-50, and the Kisarazu, the H-1S, got itself some TOW2s. So that increases its usability a little bit. Then, of course, we had AIM-7D and AIM-7E Sparrows. They weren't exactly working too well on the dev server, the Sparrows, but you could get them to work. You just had to lock onto a target before you took off from the ground, which, you know, it's not something that should be seen as useful. The other thing as well is they were very much acting like standard air-to-air missiles that we've had in the game before. Like when it came to the way that they locked on, if you weren't able to do that, like you would only be able to lock on from like 2 or 1 kilometer away. So we're gonna have to, you know, see in the future how these things properly work. Hopefully we get a second dev server so we can truly, you know, have a look at the capabilities of these things, because it is quite scary when you think about how far these things can be thrown from and what they can do. And also the R3R AAMs, these are going to be on the MiG-21 SMT. Not sure if they're going to be on anything else, but they did work pretty well. One thing to mention is with a lot of the Sparrow loadouts, especially on the Phantoms, and also on the F-104S, you could take Sparrows and also Sidewinders. So you could have the long-range capability and the short-range capability. When it came to the MiG-21 SMT, you could bring R3Rs, but you couldn't bring a mixture of them and something like R60s. So you were either going to have to take the semi-active, you know, radar homing missiles, or you'd have to take the, you know, the R60s. So that is a bit of an issue for the Soviets, but it is how it is. They've added new sensors. So the IT-SPG-70, Naval Nav Radar, SUMR-123, UK Type 903, 960, 992. My guess is all of this is just, you know, stuff for Naval. Then new rockets were added, Type 90 HE, Type 90 Heat. I believe these are the ones which are on the Q5. I might be wrong about that. And then the CRV-7, RA-9, and the WDU-5001. So just, you know, new stuff across the board. Then, as we talked about, new missiles, you have the R530 SARH, then the R3R, the AIM-7C, D, and E, and the AIM-7E Sparrow Max G load is 15 Gs, so it's not replacing those super AAMs we have. It's not, you know, it's not going to, you know, it's designed for a different purpose, basically. It's designed for much more long-range engagements, whether somebody is running away from you, whether you're trying to target them out of spawn, you know, all of those things. The R530 is the semi-active missile which is on the Mirage. Had a bit of a go with it. It sometimes works, it sometimes doesn't, but it does work very similarly to, you know, these ones here. Then we have some global changes. So they've changed the ground splash effects to produce a different sound. I didn't see a difference personally myself, but we'll see if that, maybe I just wasn't really paying attention. They've added new FXs for mines. I mean, this makes sense. Obviously, you know, with mines being added to the game, they have to add some more stuff to it. They've added a new code, rocket indicator show unguided, B equals no. And then rocket indicator LOS check, B equals yes. Keep dead tank on map. Ooh, so this is what was happening. Do you remember how last update where they made it so naval ships would stay around after they were blown up? So you could see like the wreckages everywhere. It looks like we might be getting that for tanks now. we might be getting it. So, because one thing I did notice is when I was destroyed in a custom battle, when I came back, my tank carcass was still there. So I'm wondering if this is going to be... This is either gonna... You know how War Thunder's been having a few server issues, the last few months? This might make it a lot worse, or at the same time, it might make it, a lot of people have been asking for this, just having, carcasses around the battlefield, which I think is a positive and a negative. Probably go into it in another video, but yeah, it's kind of interesting to see. Winchable dead tank B equals yes, so you can actually move the dead tanks with a winch if you want to, or just carry them along. Added a bunch of impulse to collision code for aircraft. So impulse is the same code that makes your tanks move around whenever a bomb explodes near you. Wait. So aircraft are now going to be affected by bomb blasts, and therefore stuff like missile blasts and things as well. So it might actually shake your plane. But at that point, your plane probably just falls apart anyway. That's kind of interesting, though. Changed a few depth of field settings for the hangar. Added a new sound, turret fall SFX. This is probably when turret gets popped. Added a completely new BLK file called collections, pictures of content. So we can have a look at that. And then added new levels of AVM Aleutian Islands and Mozdok Winter for planes. So neither of these were available on the dev server, otherwise I would have gone through them. I would have shown you them. There was pictures in the files of what these things looked at, like Aleutian, or Aleutian, or however you say it, Islands. Looks like a normal naval map, and then it also looks like there's an EC map for it as well. So, yeah, Maybe we're going large scale again. There's an overall nerf to RAM 101 LWR angles. That kind of sucks. And then the vehicle addition and removals. Like there's no real point in going through this stuff because, as I talked about before, like I've already talked about all of these. So we'll just skip that. The only difference is this one. There's some kind of T-3485s, this 53 you race. There's this 53 T-3485 is just the one which isn't the D5T. So if you look in the Soviet tree, you got the T-3485 D5T, and then after it you got another T-3485. That's just this vehicle. So it's nothing, out of the ordinary there. And there we go. So that is all of the findings of Gentlespie. There's definitely a lot of stuff going on. There's definitely a lot of interesting changes, but as I said, this update is looking way more mechanical than it is like vehicles, and I'm fine with that. It's something that fundamentally changes the gameplay, does keep it fresh, and as long as it all works very well, is looking very juicy. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd like to thank Ambrosius McClellan, B. Young, Battling Bacon, Blackie, Chris Giltnane, Conte Baraka, Daniel Stanton, Elove Goat, Jay Wilt, Martinez, Trigger Hippie, Universe, Eugens Terry, and also I'm Devilish and Samuel Slick for supporting the channel.